I'd like to make a few introductions. You've heard me talking to Amanda Sanders. Amanda is our Senior Administrative Specialist in the Planning, Trails, and GIS unit. Amanda, you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody. So glad that you can make it tonight, and I hope you find this meeting informational.
Amanda is running all the magic, the Zoom magic behind the scenes. Thanks, Amanda. And I'd also like to introduce Scott Stoller. Scott is a civil engineer with our Restoration Projects unit. He's the project lead, and he will be presenting the project concepts this evening. Scott?
Hey, folks. Glad to be here. We'll be talking soon.
Great. And I'm very pleased to introduce Elizabeth Eckles, a member of our East Bay Regional Park District Board of Directors. She's representing Ward 1, where this project occurs. Director Eckles?
Yes, hi, good evening, everybody. I really appreciate all of you taking time out of your evening to participate in our public workshop. And, obviously that poll just shows, how many of you are coming from really all over the East Bay, and also the large amount of people who are concerned about the future and the changing landscape. And so this is a great opportunity for all of you to discuss with us the proposed concepts for the future of Jewel Lake. And we really value your input and look forward to your comments this evening. Jewel Lake is an important gem in the Park District. And like many of you, it has a special place in my heart. I have many happy memories spending time at Jewel Lake as a child growing up, and have enjoyed spending time there with my 7-year-old daughter as well. The lake was created by East Bay mud to store drinking water nearly 100 years ago. And as you'll hear more about this evening, over the years, as a result of urbanization around Tilden and erosive soils, our once flourishing lake has silted in. And of course, I don't have to really tell you that, because that's one reason why most of you are here. The Park District Board understands the severity of the situation. And with input from you this evening, we will work together to find the right solution to revitalize this area of the watershed in a way that enhances the natural process and habitat while maintaining a beloved destination for park visitors. And now I'll turn it back over to Mike Moran to get us started. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Director Eckles. So, Scott, can we run down to the next slide, please? Okay. So you can see that in the study timeline, this has been in study for quite a while, and we're in that second box there, the concept evaluation. That's what you're helping us with tonight. We've developed the 4 different concepts that Scott will be presenting. It's seen a review from the Board Executive Committee, and we are participating in public workshop number 1. If you look at the next couple of boxes, though, you'll see once again, this is not the last chance for your input. A beloved area, and we want to make sure that we're using as much public input as we can to make the right decisions going forward in the stewardship. Great. Next slide, please. The purpose of the study is really to evaluate the feasibility and the trade-offs of these different concepts. Now, the purposes or the goals can be broken down into really 2 different buckets, and they directly speak to and really highlight the distinction of enhancing natural processes and maintaining this area as a treasured public destination. So the natural processes are for native species habitat, provide fish and salmonid passage, sediment accumulation, and then maintaining it as a public destination as a level of public access, provided as a destination, and maintain that lake as open water. Okay, next slide, please. So taking us back 100 years, we understand, as Director Eckles said, Jewel Lake was purpose-built. Silt and sediment made the water difficult to use for that purpose, and it soon became a really storied and treasured park, one of our earliest regional parks. And that same really enthusiastic sedimentation that Director Eckles spoke of called for dredging in 1967 and 1991, and brings us up to project at hand today. Next slide, please. Watersheds. This is a well-studied watershed, which is a really great boon, a great benefit. Those studies offer really well-documented and informed direction to plan and build the watershed's future. The previous studies you see listed here included Jewel Lake as a piece of a broader study. And they've led us to this first study, looking specifically at applications for Jewel Lake. And the Jewel Lake proposal it's an opportunity to explore sustainable approaches to enhancing and restoring many of the ecological values of this part of Tilden Nature Area and the Wildcat Creek watershed as a whole, while at the same time building upon these deep personal connections that people have had here for generations. Next slide, please. Watershed management. We hear that term an awful lot. And watershed management, watershed scale management, and that's good. It shows that the advances in ecosystem understanding and management, when we manage for Jewel Lake, we manage for Alvarado, we manage for Richmond, we manage for San Pablo, and even the Bay. Now, watersheds are dynamic systems. They're constantly changing, and the processes that make them so rich, and in which these organisms from trees to invertebrates, cultures, individuals have sustained and thrived over the years, thousands of years actually. These processes are ongoing. They don't stop. And we often think of water as the single most important component of a watershed, and it is. But it's what the water does to and for the entire watershed that we're managing. Next slide, please. We're going to be on this slide for a couple minutes, folks. Though very complex and intertwined, watershed processes rely on some really basic foundational components, these physical realities that are shared by all rivers, all streams, all creeks. And each waterway has three zones: the zone of erosion, transportation, and deposition. Now, the foundation of sound watershed-wide management is knowing where those zones are so we can manage within those really enriching processes. The zone of erosion is high up in the watershed, our East Bay crest. So the water, like it's raining tonight, isn't that great? You get fog, drip, drizzle, sometimes torrential downpour, even that rare snow. When it comes out of the sky, it comes out clean. There's not much dirt in it. And when it hits the ground and runs off, gravity energizes it to run downhill, and it uses that downhill run of energy to pick up the riches of the watershed, the soil, the leaves, debris, bugs, decomposing animals, and it distributes those riches downstream. We call this hungry water, water that hits the ground empty, and then it has an appetite created by that gravitational energy. And as the load of water moves out of the steeps of the upper watershed, its route kind of flattens out a little bit and it slows down. It no longer has the power to erode, but it still has enough energy to carry or transport these riches that it has eaten upstream, but not really enough to erode anymore. And this is called the zone of transportation. And as the water moves into the lower reaches of the watershed, it's lost most of its energy. And it slows down, can no longer carry the sediment it's picked up along its travel. So it just dumps it along the lower reaches of the creek and into the bay. And this is the zone of deposition, an incredibly rich area where all those treasures of the watershed are deposited. This is where we find wetlands and deltas. Now, these three zones are net effect areas. The overall effect in the zone of erosion is erosion, but within that zone, you can find little pockets of transportation and deposition occurring. And the same for the other two zones. So this enhances the watershed-wide distribution of this watershed wealth, this sediment. Then if watersheds were a one-way system, only sending nutrients downstream without any regeneration, they quickly become sterile. But with fish, like Wildcat Creek's historic runs of steelhead, those ocean-going rainbow trout, and other organisms transporting nutrients back upstream, those nutrients are cycled back onto the watershed. And even fog and wind can transport those nutrients gathered off the bay, and they redistribute them onto the watershed. Go to the next photo, the next slide, please. So Jewel Lake, the construction of Jewel Lake interrupted those watershed-wide processes. Jewel Lake traps sediment. Those are the riches of the watershed. And the dam blocks fish, including rainbow trout, from passage to 2 miles of high-quality, resilient habitat upstream. Next slide, please. we have an opportunity to restore natural processes, watershed-wide processes. Jewel Lake is a zone of deposition. It's an artificial zone of deposition. Willows, alders, cattails, they thrive on the surface and they quickly cover what used to be lake. And the nutrients are buried and they're unavailable to downstream reaches of the creek. Very importantly, if you look at that picture on the left, the water that flows out of the lake, having dumped its sediments, load, is now hungry water once again. And it erodes the banks and the stream bed below and turns that into a zone of erosion. You figure, well, so what, right? Isn't that just natural, like up in the upper watershed? Yes, but the hungry water that was widely distributed and dispersed across and actually gathering riches from the entire upper watershed, just imagine many tiny little appetites, is now concentrated into a thin stream channel. You got one large, powerfully erosive appetite eroding downstream to bedrock, washing out nutrients, even making downstream slopes less stable. And you can see the picture on the right, undercutting, dramatically undercutting the spillway just downstream of the dam. Next slide, please. Putting sustainable processes into place. And this project provides an opportunity to reconnect all these enriching watershed-wide processes, the ecological, recreational, interpretive, accessible, inclusive processes. And the opportunity happens to lie in the very area that for generations, since time immemorial, has enriched these profound personal human connections with what we now call Tilden Nature Area. It's a signature experience for East Bay folks, for countless people, generation to generation, as it has been for my boys and me on our many magical visits there. My boys, who just turned 18 and 21 years old last month. So I can fall into that group that went well over 10 years over to Jewel Lake. Scott is now going to present several concepts that really embrace these processes and the community's deeply held values of the place to manage this watershed resiliently and sustainably into the future. Scott?
Thanks, Mike. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the 4 concepts that we've developed and go over a goals matrix to evaluate those concepts and also present a conceptual level cost estimate. I do want to acknowledge the hard work that our consultant team who is present on this call. So, during the question and answer session, if there are questions that are very technical in nature, we may call on them, folks from Balance Hydrologics and RDG. So really appreciate their help in developing these concepts and helping to refine the ideas that are presented tonight. And so what we really want to do as I present these concepts is really imagine, a future where, as visitors, that we can step into one of these 4 potential possible futures. And the first, and so before I do that, I just wanted to do a little get you all oriented to the site, and all of the slides that I show showing the plan view of Jewel Lake will have this orientation. And so if you look toward the center of the screen in our study area is Jewel Lake itself. And the creek is flowing from right to left. And so the Environmental Education Center is on the right of the screen, and the parking lot is further to the right off the page. And Wildcat Canyon is off to the left of the page. And just to give, so you see these orange dots, those just reflect some of the things that we all know and love about this area. The Little Farm, the Environmental Education Center, the Tilden Nature Ponds, which are really cool. Then on the other side, we have the upper and lower Wildcat, upper and lower Pack Rat trails, the boardwalk that goes through this area. So really a lot of things that, in your poll that you really acknowledge that are really valuable when you come visit the Tilden Nature Area. Now, the first concept that I'm going to talk about, the first future that I'm going to invite you to envision is really one in which the lake, as it stands, really progresses much in the same trajectory as it has for the last couple of decades. That being that the lake has been capturing sediment, and under this scenario, it would continue to capture that sediment. And really, we consider this as the option where we do no action, essentially, and let nature take its course. And so what we see in this concept really that sediment continues to fill the lake, and eventually it'll turn into a wetland, a wet meadow, a riparian zone, much like we experience when we look upstream where the boardwalk is. This concept, the only real active work that would be done would be to fix the downstream of the spillway where you saw that 15-foot erosional scar. So that would be one piece that would be active in this concept. But on the public access, there wouldn't be any changes to public access in this scenario. This slide and the slides that follow present cross sections through the project site. You'll notice that we have cross section A, which is the top cross section, and it's facing downstream. So you can imagine yourself downstream of the spillway, facing downstream. And this is pretty much what a cross section would look like if you stood out there today with a relatively wide creek bottom and a relatively steep bank on that right-hand side. The second section that you'll see throughout this presentation is a section B, which is the bottom section. Again, it's oriented downstream, and it's cut through the lake a little bit, and it also hits a piece of Wildcat Creek. And so that's what you'll notice here. We have Wildcat Creek on the right, and really what we're projecting is that what we see as Jewel Lake would really transition into a wetland and a wet meadow, essentially. And to give a visual representation, here's a couple of photos showing essentially Jewel Lake as it is now. And it's showing the wetland encroaching onto the lake edge. And again, kind of a mature riparian system where we have the boardwalk cutting through that area. The second concept that I want to invite you to step into is really one that represents the way that this system has been managed for the last 100 years. And so what this shows is that Jewel Lake would be dredged again to similar dimensions as in 1991 and 1967. This plan also adds a fishway that would connect to the spillway and connect downstream to Wildcat Creek. And this fishway would be designed to provide the ability for rainbow trout and salmonids to migrate up into Jewel Lake and into upper Wildcat Creek. This concept does not have much change to the public access aside from adjusting the Wildcat Canyon Trail to accommodate the proposed fishway. One of the things that you'll notice is that water will continue to flow as it has been. And so what that means is that all of the runoff and storm flow that comes through the system will enter Jewel Lake and then go through the fishway. And so Jewel Lake would continue to capture sediment into the future and would require periodic dredging. We're estimating on the order of every 20 to 25 years that dredging would be required. Cross sections through this concept, again, the upper cross section is showing through the downstream reach. And it is really what it's showing is you'll notice that the fishway channel is cut through a couple of times. That's because of the meander. And you'll notice that the Wildcat Canyon Trail is pushed up on the hillside there. The lower cross section represents the dredged lake and the open water that would ensue. And so this just gives you a sense of what that might look like. And again, some images to help illustrate this further. We have there's a photo from 1991 of the dredging that took place at that time. And again, the open water that would result from that work. Concept 3 really invites us to imagine what was here 100 years ago. Well, up until 100 years ago when Jewel Lake was formed. And so really what this concept does is it takes us back to a time when Wildcat Creek flowed freely. And so in this concept, the dam actually would be removed and the restored channel would be constructed through this entire reach. Some public access adjustments that would happen. So we would be losing the trail where my hand, if you can see the hand, is where the dam exists today. And so the trail that crosses the dam and Lower Pack Rat Trail, that would be removed and relocated so that we have a new boardwalk and crossing of Wildcat Creek. In addition to the possibility of adding an additional trail on the far side of the project site. The cross section shown for this concept, essentially, the downstream is pretty similar to the other concepts shown. And then if we look at the one through where the lake was, you'll notice that we have a seasonal wetland shown here and the restored creek channel here on the right. And I think one of the things that's important to know with any large scale restoration such as this is that there is land disturbance that's involved. What we do see with the planting of pioneer species, we see rapid succession. And so these two photos essentially show a project that was constructed back in 2007 on the left, and then just after about 6 years, the willows coming in pretty vigorously on the right, and just to show that these systems, they take time to evolve, but they do tend to recover pretty quickly. And then again, mature Wildcat Creek. This is taken further upstream of the project site. The fourth concept that I'm presenting here really invites us to imagine, what if this was a blank slate, and what if we were to design a lake and have Wildcat Creek flow in its fairly natural form. So this concept really invites us to think about, if we were to design Jewel Lake today with the environmental ethos of habitat protection and restoration, while at the same time wanting to provide recreational amenity, how might that look? And so what this concept is showing actually, Jewel Lake dredged in the same place as it exists today. But what we've done is we've included what we're calling a bypass channel. And so what you'll notice is that this channel can flow freely all the way around Jewel Lake. And so what that does for us is it, as Mike mentioned, the sediment continuity is really important in watershed processes and watershed health. And so this concept enables the sediment coming from upstream to bypass the lake and continue downstream to replenish the stream downstream. And what this concept how it would function is that there would be, if you can see, there's a new bridge over a diversion structure. And so the way that this diversion structure would function essentially is to allow flows for most of the year to flow down Wildcat Creek when we have, especially when there's heavy rainfalls with turbid water with lots of sediment in it. And during periods where the water is not flowing as fast and not carrying as much sediment, we would divert flow through Jewel Lake to maintain the water level and water quality. And so it would be an actively managed system. What you'll notice also is that there are some modifications to public access. There's an addition of a new trail around the side of the lake, and some additional stairs perhaps to connect and form a short loop through Pack Rat Trail. The cross section shown for this concept, again, the downstream is pretty similar through most of them that have that active channel. But upstream, the lower cross section that you'll see, shows on the left the Wildcat Creek bypass, and then on the right, the dredged and new Jewel Lake. And so really, I think the opportunity that this concept provides is having a lake that persists for decades, if not centuries, without needing to be dredged. And again, some photos that really kind of highlight some of those project elements, the new step pools, open water, and so what we're doing now, what's shown on the screen is our decision matrix. And really what this is, it's a way for us to compare the concepts that are shown on the top line of this table with our project goals that are shown on the left-hand side of the screen. And these are the same that Mike presented early on in the presentation. Those project goals include native species habitat enhancement, salmonid and rainbow trout fish passage, preventing sediment deposition, maintaining a certain level of public access, and that this area remains a destination for walkers. And also to maintain the lake as open water. And I think what you see underneath each of the concepts is a series of pluses and minus, perhaps. And so the minuses really represent where the concept does not meet a project goal. And then the pluses, as you get more pluses, it really represents that we're meeting the project goal to a better standard, a better degree. And so I think what really stands out to me is that no matter what concept is selected, we really have trade-offs that will need to be acknowledged and sorted through for any concept that is selected as the preferred concept. Is that there might be another concept that does the same thing better, and so it's really this decision is going to come down to values and how do we value some of these different project goals. You'll notice on the right-hand side, concept 4, we see the pluses all down the line. And so, really this concept was conceived to really provide the best of both worlds, to see if that was a feasible option. And it does seem to be through the study that we are able to achieve an open water lake and a fish passable creek. The next slide I'm going to show is project lifecycle costs. And again, we're at a conceptual level in the project. And so these costs reflect that. What you'll notice for each concept, there's 2 bars, 2 costs columns, and those represent the range of costs for each of these concepts. The other thing you'll notice is that we have a dark green, a middle green, a light green, and those represent the costs at different project stages. And so the lowest level, the dark green, represent the design and permitting cost. The middle green is our construction cost, and the upper green is the ongoing maintenance and monitoring costs. And then the total project costs are those top line numbers that you see floating in white. Not surprisingly, concept 1, because it is the no action alternative, there isn't much work that needs to be done, and it naturally is the lowest cost alternative there. When we look at the other concepts, you'll notice there's kind of a stair step in the construction cost, and things do get more expensive as we move to the right through the concepts. And that's primarily attributable to earthwork, and as probably the biggest single cost contributor there. But when we look at maintenance and monitoring for the long term, and again, this is looking at a 50-year time frame, we notice that concept 2 has relatively high maintenance costs, and that's largely attributed to sediment management, both dredging the lake periodically, but also maintaining a sedimentation basin that is a little bit further upstream from the lake. In concept 3, because it is kind of build it and let nature heal, it has very relatively low life cycle maintenance costs. And then we see in concept 4 kind of an in-between, that there's going to be some active maintenance for the diversion structure, but nothing to, in terms of sediment management through that concept. The last thing I wanted to touch on is just some of the stakeholder outreach, public outreach that we've been doing. Obviously, as you all know, tonight is our first public meeting, but before tonight, we've spoken to local agencies, both East Bay Mud, Contra Costa Flood Control, the cities of Richmond, San Pablo, and Berkeley, and also the Confederated Villages of the Lishan, local tribes. I wanted to wrap up by just touching again on our study timeline, but also acknowledging that this is a complicated project, and we have, and through this feasibility study, I think we've really identified, four feasible options. We really wanted to look at, the range of different projects that could happen here, and really evaluate them to see how they met our project goals. So, as Mike mentioned, again, we're in this yellow box where we're in the concept evaluation stage. As I mentioned, we talked to different agency stakeholders. We presented to our board executive committee, and here we are at public workshop number 1. So we really value tonight as an important milestone and an important time to get input from you all. What we plan to do after this is to continue that outreach, but really to incorporate what we've heard from you all here and through our other outreach efforts, refine the concepts and some of our thinking around those, and then do one more round of outreach where we're able to present what we think is a refined approach, perhaps the preferred concept at that point. And then ultimately it will go to the board where they will consider and likely provide direction on where, what the next stage of this project would be, which essentially is selecting the preferred concept and moving into design and construction phase. With that, I'll turn it back over to Mike to lead us in our question and answer portion. And really, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat and we will go through those. And then, if you're able to get them relatively early in the queue, then we'll have a sense of how many questions we have and be able to allot time to everybody.
Great, thank you, Scott. That was fantastic. Amanda has been keeping a list of all the questions that we've had submitted thus far. Thank you very much. And I did see that Peter Guerrero has a hand raised. Thank you, Peter. We're going to go through the written questions first, and then we'll open it up for more of a conversational Q&A format. Amanda, do you want to provide us with the questions?
Yes. The first question is from Ellen Barth, and it says, why is there not concern for sediment transport and deposition for other dam streams in, I don't know, it says PD, I'm not sure what that is. And then Jewel Lake is vulnerable because water is not used as a reservoir or human swimming location. There would be a huge people resistance.
Okay, I'm sorry, man. Can you do that one more time, please?
Sure. This was came after you were talking about sedimentation and that sort of thing. So it was asking why there wasn't other concern about transportation of sediment and deposition of it, and that Jewel Lake is vulnerable because the water is not used as a reservoir for drinking or for swimming.
Okay, so let me see. I'm sorry, can you give me the name of the person who's submitted?
Yes, that was Ellen Barth.
Okay, thanks so much, Ellen. And I'm not sure I 100% understand your question, but I know you were asking about sediment transport, and I'm assuming you're saying, why is it just Jewel Lake? Why aren't we thinking about other areas and barriers along the creek? Is it possible to unmute Ellen? Is that okay? Just to get clarity? Because
yes, can you hear me?
There we go. Thanks so much. Hi, Ellen.
Hi. there are many other streams that are dammed and produce sediment in the park district.
Yes.
They are dredged periodically. Somehow the sediment in Jewel Lake is considered less worthy of removal for the sake of the species. I believe some of that is because on other areas where streams are dammed, whether it's Temescal or, I'm sorry, I can't come up with the others, but at least for other lakes, that they are used for human use or reservoirs. And this, which your picture shows in all its beauty, can be maintained if it could be dredged. It has only been dredged twice in the time that the reservoir has been there. So I would just, I hope that you will consider a plan for dredging, and it may not be appropriate, but I also noticed the plan which gives the most chance for having the lake preserved and for the fish does not accord with some of the diagrams that were in the previous versions of how to do this, which indicated the stream would have to be cut lower than the lake, or the lake would draw off the water. Your picture for the fourth proposed solution does not show how Jewel Lake would have water fed into it or go out. Also, the pack rat trail is not particularly accurate. And there is a certain trade-off in allowing for the lake as well as the fish to continue in having two new paths cut through habitat, which has been pristine for decades, and in having a trail circumnavigate Jewel Lake, and that cuts off species that have used these marshy places. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Ellen. I think, I hope you had a chance to express what you were wanting to. I do want to just touch on the deposition of sediment, though. We said there are other dams in East Bay Regional Parks. My guess is, like, why are we dealing with Jewel Lake? It's a good example of how watersheds are dramatically different even throughout the East Bay, and how the sedimentation processes are different, and also how that blends with management at that time. So that's a very good point. And so Scott, did you want to speak to any of the more technical questions about, like, we were talking about the intake level, Ellen, in concept number 4, I think. Did you get that, Scott?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that, and then afterwards I'll see if Matt wants to speak more to district-wide lakes. But essentially, we acknowledge that if the creek itself in concept 4 is below the lake level, there may be a hydraulic gradient, kind of like you're alluding to. Maybe subsurface water would drain from the lake. And that's something that we certainly acknowledge, and is our design team is thinking about those things. And so that berm would actually be designed with compacted fill, similar to how a dam is constructed, to help maintain the lake water level there.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. That's great. Let's see, and then Amanda, do we have the next question, please?
Yes, the next question is from Linda Blockman, and she asks if somebody could address the impact of the drought and climate change, and the fact that there is currently no water in the lake and no wildlife, and if any of the options that we presented address the current state of the lake area.
Okay, I'll start off. Linda, thank you very much. That's the big question in pretty much every project that we do. Park District has as a main initiative climate resiliency. So this is part and parcel of that. As far as anticipated changes, is there anybody else on the EBRPD staff that would like to address that one? Anticipated changes in flow regimes or anything like that?
Matt Grawl, is that something that you can speak to?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the drought has certainly reduced stream flow in some areas. We've seen areas dry up much faster, some of our ponds. Many parts of Wildcat Creek did dry up this year, but some pools in certain areas did maintain, even despite a lack of inflow last winter. But we have seen a big decrease in sedimentation in the watershed too. I mean, just because there was less flow last winter. So the sediment basins that protect Jewel Lake did not accumulate as much sediment as they would in a typical year this year, but just because there was less flow of water through the system to transport sediment. And so I think that's the best I can answer the drought question. It's reduced available habitat in many of our ponds, and we've had a lot less flows in some of our streams. I think there was an earlier question though about dredging of other lakes and one dredging of this and why it's important. And so I'm not familiar with other lakes that have been dredged during my career with the Park District. We do maintain sediment basins within this watershed at the Environmental Education Center, and then up at the golf course, there was a sediment basin that used to be maintained. And those areas were to protect these lakes. We also maintain dredging basins that are dredged at Temescal to help protect Temescal, but they're very small and they only remove a small amount of sediment coming in there each year. And the Temescal basins have not been anywhere near what was needed to maintain that lake. So we're looking at a long-term need to dredge Lake Temescal in the future. And it's just a much bigger project that's going to be anywhere, as the estimates now are that it would to be between $20 to $25 million to dredge Lake Temescal. And so that has not, that's something the district does have a long-term interest in protecting and maintaining Lake Temescal, but that's just on a different time scale because it's a much larger project. And I'm not aware of any other lakes that we have dredged at this scale beyond Jewel Lake, the several times that it's happened.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Scott. And thank you, Linda, for bringing climate change into the discussion. That's fantastic. Amanda, another question?
Yes, give me just 1 second.
Thank you.
I was counting my questions. I have to find my spot again. Okay, this next question is from Lisa Carey. And it is, how does Lake Anza affect what's happening downstream at Jewel Lake? Where are the turtles? How did otters get into Jewel Lake a couple of years ago? And then I think I saw somebody else's that was very similar. So let me scroll down to theirs as well. 1 second.
Amanda, while you're finding that other question, Matt, could you speak to that sedimentation and just the issues, the difference between Lake Anza or the impacts of Anza upstream of Jewel Lake?
Yeah, so again, Matt Grohl, the Chief of Stewardship for the East Regional Park District. Lake Anza is just was much deeper originally, and Lake Anza is fed by a much smaller watershed above it. And that part of that portion of the watershed is also slightly less erosive than the reaches between Lake Anza and Jewel Lake. And so Lake Anza is filling slowly, but it's a much slower process because there's less sediment input and it was much deeper to begin with. So when we've done studies in the past, right now we're not seeing the volume of Lake Anza as being an issue. I mean, in the future, as things continue, it could fill, and there may be a need to dredge Lake Anza in the future to maintain water quality. But when this was last studied under the sediment study we did for the entire watershed that was finished in 2016, that didn't identify Lake Anza as having a need for dredging.
And there was a question regarding, I heard turtles and otters. I know that otters have been seen actually over the last decade, river otters have made pretty amazing inroads into East Bay areas. We have it Lake Temescal, Lake Merritt, up at Jewel Lake, and it's generally along water courses. So that might be Wildcat Creek, but they are incredibly adaptable critters. So they might be using waterways for part of the way, and then using city streets and sidewalks and anything else, other trails and things somewhere near the creek, and then heading back down towards the water. So how they got there is by taking advantage of the connection from Wildcat down at the bay, probably all the way on up into Lake Anza. And that's one of the great features about this, is that this stretch of creek is predominantly daylighted or uncovered, and it provides great habitat and open, consistent access for animals from the bayfront all the way up. There are still some blockages, but for somebody who's as nimble as an otter, that doesn't provide much of an impediment. Amanda, did you find that similar question?
I didn't, but we'll go ahead and go on to the next one. It is from Peter Guerrero, and question is, what will prevent the lake in option 4 from becoming algae choked in anticipated hotter climate change summers with insufficient rainfall to allow for enough replenishment of the lake?
Great, that's a great question. I'll turn it over to Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I think one of the really, one of the high points, if we can say that, of the Jewel Lake area is that the water quality has been maintained over the years. And it's one of the few places where we have not seen, outbreaks of blue-green algae. So, part of it has to do with, its location in the watershed, and that, Lake Anza, is upstream, and it provides, kind of like the first pass for, nutrients that are in the watershed to settle out. But really, I think it attributes to, it's a smaller lake, and so there's much higher turnover of the water stock, you could say. So the residence time of water in the lake is a lot lower than some of the other lakes around the park district. And I think that maybe the third thing could be, that it's relatively sheltered from the sun, so that there isn't, it's not heated by direct sunlight all day long. It is forested around that lake.
Thanks, Scott. Amanda, next question, please.
Yep. Next question is from Sarah Puckett, and it is, can you please explain why concept 4 provides a greater benefit to native species and habitat than concept 3? Thank you.
And I'll turn that right back over to Scott.
All right. Yeah. So I think what you'll notice with some of the pluses and the gradation of pluses in that table is, I think that one can make an argument for more pluses for one thing or less for another. For what you're specifically asking about, I think we wanted to recognize that with the open water, it does provide a habitat for additional species. I know that some of the migratory birds and some other wildlife needs open water, but there are a lot of the native wildlife, like red-legged frogs and western pond turtle that they like open water, but they also do very well in riparian areas as well. And so I think the rating that you're talking about is really just a recognition that there is a few more species that could be helped. But we also do recognize that open water reservoirs that are year round also harbor invasive species, bullfrogs, for example, that do predate on native species. So there's some trade-offs, and that's one of the challenges, I think, in evaluating some of these concepts against our goals.
Great.
Okay, we have a couple more questions regarding from Ellen Barth, and they're regarding the pictures shown, the cross-section pictures. So the first one is, why does the picture for number 3 show more water in Wildcat Creek than in the other concept pictures? And let me get to the other one real quick, sorry. How does Wildcat Creek in number 4 flow in and out of Jewel Lake? Which that might have been answered in the presentation. I thought I heard something about that.
Okay. And then Scott, I'll send that over to you once again, since there's a question about the concepts. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, Ellen, I really appreciate the detailed questions. So I think if you're referring to the cross sections for concept 3, I think part of that is, artistic rendering, where they place the actual water line in there. But in regard to concept 4, I think that is a good question, and I'll try and go back to that slide. Let's see if I can go up to it. So I'm hoping that you can see my hand, but if you cannot, toward the upstream, there where we have a new bridge crossing Wildcat Creek there. There's a diversion structure that's planned for underneath that. And so, there's a few different options that we're thinking about for the design of that. But the function essentially would be, if you think about like a gate or a door, that we have, kind of two doors, one that is typically closed that would go into Jewel Lake, and then one that's typically open that allows flow down Wildcat Creek. And so by adjusting those doors, either closing one completely and opening one completely, or some variation thereof, we're able to control the flow of water between the lake and the creek. And so that's really how the diversion structure would function. It's located upstream of the lake. And then any of the flow out of the lake would continue down the existing spillway and then join Wildcat Creek downstream. I hope that's clear.
Great. All right.
Okay, the next question is from Diane White. And this was the one that was about Lake Anza. How do each of the alternatives impact management and flow releases from Lake Anza?
Amanda, can you say it again? How do?
Sure. How do each of the different 4 alternatives impact management and flow releases from Lake Anza?
Oh,
Water flow releases.
right. So is the management of Lake Anza going to be changed one way or another based upon the management goals of Jewel Lake? Okay, so can I give that one to Matt? Is that something that you might be able to address?
Sure, that's easy. Yeah, this will not affect the flow of Lake Anza. Since this is downstream, there will be no change in the flows into Lake Anza from this project. And the releases from Lake Anza, there really aren't releases. I mean, we do put up flashboards to retain more water in the summer. And then after the end of the swim season, those flashboards will be taken down. And so some of that water will be released downstream, but that's only once a year. And it's a very limited amount of water that comes down into the creek at those times. And it doesn't, I mean, it basically would potentially fill Jewel Lake when you open that a little bit, provide a little additional water to Jewel Lake when you remove those flashboards. But it doesn't provide a lot of water into the overall watershed because it's only a few feet of water in Lake Anza that gets released downstream. And that's just once a year.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, the next question comes from Adele Ho. Which of the 4 alternatives is best suited for a drier climate in terms of habitat, aesthetics, and maintenance?
Yeah, we're getting a number of questions regarding drier climates. And I'm going to turn that over to Scott again. But just to know that the climate projections, as they are changing so dramatically, even year to year, it seems like, we are anticipating more mercurial flow. So we might get something a little flashier. We may have wetter years, shorter seasons, but more intense seasons, a lot of different changes that folks are probably familiar with. And projects such as this and other projects are really geared at being resilient and adapting to those projections and what we might be able to do to take full advantage of those rare opportunities that may show up to provide habitat for species of concern or for habitat areas of concern. So that being said, Scott, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, I can touch on it. And then again, ask Matt to add something. So I just to highlight what Mike said that I think is really important is that these are natural systems that we're dealing with, and the native species that are here have evolved over millennia to be adaptive to variations in our Mediterranean climate, and so we're not necessarily thinking that we're designing for specific species for climate change, but really to provide a resilient and adaptive system that species can use you know, kind of as one of the beads you might think of along this whole stretch of Wildcat Creek from the bay, you know, on up, you know, past Lake Anza. And so it's not that, you know, that this area needs to do everything for all species, that there's lots of habitat available along the length of Wildcat Creek. You know, I would say that, you know, concept 3, because it is, you know, we're setting it and, you know, to some extent, you know, forgetting it, that it's a concept that is naturalizing into the surrounding topography, much like, you know, the rest of Wildcat Creek, that it, you know, essentially would become invisible, ideally in the landscape, and have some persistent pools, perhaps in the summertime, but largely function in a similar capacity. But again, you know, these are trade-offs, and there are some positives from some concepts and some negatives from those same concepts. You know, I think that the argument can be made that, you know, open water is a net benefit, because, you know, it provides, you know, refuge during, you know, times of low water, even though it does, again, as I mentioned earlier, you know, provide habitat for invasive species that predate on the natives. So, you know, I think it's a really good question, and I don't know if there is like the best, you know, that would be adaptive to some of what we think will be, you know, the future under climate change. You know, again, you know, concept 4, best of both worlds, perhaps that could be, you know, highlighted as well. And then even, you know, lowly concept 1, you know, it really, you know, from a climate change standpoint, I don't know if it really does much, but, you know, it does, you know, once the lake fills up, sediment will continue downstream, and kind of replenish and provide that sediment continuity that some of the other concepts that we talk about show. But that's kind of how I'd summarize them. Not necessarily that one is a clear favorite for climate change resilience per se.
Great. And Amanda, another question, please.
Just one moment. Sorry, I was
Thank you.
scrolling again. Okay, next question is also from Adeleho, and it is, does the Lishan tribe have a concept preference? And if so, why? And if I said that wrong, I apologize.
And the Lishan is within the Huchian group. Those folks, this is the ancestral homelands of different tribes along this area here. And as far as consultation or input, could somebody else provide an answer for that?
Yeah, I can speak to that, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we recently met with the Confederated tribes of the Lishan, Confederated villages, excuse me, of the Lishan. And, you know, again, they were seeing the concepts much like you all are today. And for the first time, it was fresh for them. You know, I do know that, you know, the concepts that provide the fish passage, they were, you know, obviously very keen on, and we're asking, you know, which is the concept that provides the best scenario for salmon passage. But it's a continuing conversation with folks from the Lishan, and you know, we look forward to speaking with them, you know, in the coming months to really understand, you know, some of their priorities for this project.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks for the question, Adele.
Okay, the next question is from David Zuckerman, and says, there is a major drainage gully that carries Kensington runoff that enters just below the dam. I'm curious how each of the 4 proposals would address this.
Great question, Dave. Well, this is that downstream of the dam where we talked about the hungry water beginning to come back downstream and enhancing the erosive potential down there. And then when you throw in the Kensington drainage there, could somebody speak more specifically to that? Could that be a question for Matt?
Mike, I can take that as
Oh,
well.
Scott, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So just a note that, this, our slides and the concepts will be on our website for people to, look at more carefully. And what you'll notice is that we're treating the drainage from Kensington differently in the different concepts. And really, I think what we're showing through that is that we have different options. And I wouldn't say that our treatment of that runoff, is fixed to a specific concept. That I think that the preferred concept, when that's settled upon, can borrow from the treatment that are shown on the different concepts. But quickly, I'll just highlight that and say, Dave, definitely the drainage right now, it's routed around the dam, and it's a gully that is deepening over the years, and it is a concern, and it is addressed in each of the concepts, whether it is formalized and in concept 2 that it's directed around the dam, or that in concept 3, I believe it's routed to Jewel Lake, but the first stop is through a wetland complex. And then, so there's different ways that we're thinking about it. Right now our thinking is flexible. We're really looking to see, how best to use that resource. There is water coming in, but also, as noted by the erosion in that channel, there is at times, a fairly large sediment slug that comes down too, and so that needs to be considered as well.
Thanks, Scott. Amanda, for the next question, I just noticed that another one of our board of directors members, Colin Coffey, is here representing Ward 7. Just wanted to recognize Director Coffey and thank him for attending.
Okay, the next question is from Michael Saucy, and the question is, are beavers a historic species at Jewel Lake? And how would the park deal with beavers' contribution should they arrive in the future?
That is a great question. There is great evidence that beavers have been around in the Bay Area for quite some time, and they're mostly distributed, different species up in the mountains as well. There are beavers right now as far east in the Delta as folks have probably heard about the ones in Martinez. But as far as them making their way up into Wildcat Creek, I don't have any information on that. Anyone from our biology team have any information regarding that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. I mean, it could have been here historically. I know we haven't had any recent occurrences in the last, in the modern times. And I think, where they are in Martinez, where Mike's talking about, in Alhambra Creek, I mean, it's in the lower reaches of the creek where it's flat. And they've been building dams in there closer to the bay or to the edge of the, I guess, closer to the river there, where it comes into the bay. But, I think if they did show up in this area, I think in many ways we'd be happy to have them and try to keep them in play. I mean, and then not disturb, anything they'd build. They'd be a good addition potentially to a system. I mean, they can, sometimes their dams can impact infrastructure, so they might need some minor modification, but for the most part, if they were here, that would likely be a good addition to the watershed. And earlier, I know there was a question about river otters, and I wanted to say that river otters typically they can travel over land. So I think there's been questions about how they came to Jewel Lake or how they got to Lake Temescal, and they can travel over land 10 miles a day or up to 20 miles a day, which is unexpected. They would typically go along a water course, but when needed, they can. The river otters do travel over land.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Matt. Matter of fact, in many parts of the world, they're known as land otters. Amanda, another question, please.
Okay, well, I just want to say that I did learn something about otters tonight. Okay. The next question is from Chris Perry, and they asked if you could compare the habitat values for options 3 and 4. I think we might have talked about that a little bit before, but that is one of the questions.
Scott, you want to make a quick review of that, the habitat comparisons between number 3 and number 4?
Yeah, I think that might be better if Matt or Becky or Joe wants to take that on. I think that might be appropriate.
Great, thank you. Matt, Becky, or Joe, you available?
Sure. Okay, so yeah, I think on 3, I think that it provides better habitat for the salmonids, for the resident rainbow trout, and would create the potential for steelhead migration in the future as the barriers downstream are addressed. And there are long-term projects and plans to address those downstream barriers. So there's been an overall plan in the watershed to really restore connectivity within the watershed so salmonids can return into the entire watershed. And so that would be the main highlight of 3. But you would also still have some habitat within the pools and the wetland complex for the other native species, the red-legged frog and the western pond turtle. And so in option 4, you would still have the same options, but you would have potentially more habitat for waterfowl, and it would be less ideal for salmonids in option 4. And it also would require a lot more management to make it function for salmonids. So I think that's one of the challenges of option 4, but it would still provide that connectivity. I think so. The main difference, I think, in between 3 and 4 is you have more option for waterfowl. I think there are also waterfowl, though, can use Lake Anza, can use San Pablo Reservoir. There are other areas nearby that provide habitat for those waterfowl. And both options would provide good habitat for migratory birds and other riparian species. So I think both do still provide habitat for migratory birds. And so is there anything else, Becky or Joe, you would want to add to that?
The only thing I would add is the issue of riparian corridors. They do tend to be a more, I guess we've lost more of our riparian corridors than we have of our open water areas. So I would think that would be more of a benefit.
Yeah, and I would also add that Scott touched on earlier that open water reservoirs provide beneficial habitat for non-native species. So we would expect that if we keep Jewel Lake as an open water reservoir. Bullfrogs, crayfish, warm water fish species, which are predatory. So that is in my opinion, sorry, I'm the fisheries biologist for East Bay Parks, but that is a net loss of beneficial habitat for native species.
All right, thanks, Joe. Folks, just giving you a time check here. We had a lot of questions coming up, and we're at just about 5 minutes till 8. We have a handful of questions, looks like 4, and also we have run out of time for comments and such, but we do want to make some time. We do have to answer these questions. So if anybody has a question, because we do want to exchange that information about the projects. And again, want to remind folks if they do have any comments they'd like to make, any statements, as again is not the only opportunity to do so. Go to the Jewel Lake Study Project page at ebparks.org, and there are different avenues for looking up when our next meetings might be and other ways of making comments and asking questions. Thanks. We'll get through the end of these questions. Amanda, next one, please.
Okay, the next question is from Diane White, and then also I'm going to add on a bit from Ellen Barth, since they're both regarding dredging.
Okay.
Their first was, is dredging realistic given the endangered species concerns and constraints? And then also, Jewel Lake has been dredged in the past. Why are we now anticipating that it would need to be dredged every 20 years?
Take that one.
Please do, Scott. Thanks.
Yeah, so with any of the restoration work that we do, there are special and specific windows that work can happen throughout the year to avoid nesting bird season and other habitat constraints. And so typically, the construction season is 4 to 8 months long, depending on the species present. And so that's certainly a consideration in this project. And part of our project team is looking at permitting for construction and what some of those constraints on the project would be. But really, we see that any of these options could be constructed in a single construction season, and we don't see, really any constraint that would preclude us from doing the dredging. In terms of the frequency of dredging, I think one of the elements moving forward that would really benefit us in managing the system is monitoring the depth of the lake, and really, the dredging should be triggered on how full the lake is, and not just on an arbitrary time frame. But through our previous studies, it was estimated, based on the amount of sediment that passes through the system and the rate that sediment has accumulated in Jewel Lake, that time frame is approximately every 20 to 25 years. As Matt mentioned earlier, in low water years like last year in drought cycles, very little sediment gets moved in the system, and so those years could prolong the time between dredging. And similarly, when we have heavy rainstorms, a lot of sediment gets transported through the creek.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, the next question comes from Kenneth Epley, who said that they really liked proposal 3, and asked if the engineers have an argument for choosing to go without the lake and restore the creek back to a 19th century concept.
So if I might, it sounds like what engineers, I guess that's you, Scott, would be the benefit of, or the attraction of having option, restoring the creek, I should say.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. I think, from an engineering standpoint, or from, the standpoint of system reliability, I think concept 3, has the benefit that, creek restoration is something that, in the Bay Area, and in Northern California, engineers and designers and ecologists have a lot of experience with. And so, a project like this to restore the channel is, something that is, there's a good standard of practice for that. And I think that, there's a, high confidence level that that project would be successful. I think that, concept 4, where we have a bypass system, that might be, there's more unknowns, just in terms of the reliability of that system and the maintenance of it. Concept 3 really wouldn't have, the long-term maintenance associated with some of the other concepts. So it is more of a, build it, let it naturalize, and have it be part of the landscape. And so I'd say, from an engineering standpoint, that there's, obviously less reason to come and maintain the system.
Thank you. Great question. We're down to our last couple of questions, Amanda, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Let me
Actually, as soon as we know that last question, we're going to pop another Zoom poll up. I know we're pushing right past 8 o'clock. We appreciate everybody's presence and patience, and your participation has just been fantastic. And if you could stick around for a couple of minutes to finish up that Zoom poll for some final impressions, it would really help us out in moving forward with the project. Thanks.
And Michael Saucy had another question. It was, how many rainbow trout currently try to make their way up towards Jewel Lake using the creek?
Great.
69,699.
Thanks, Jacob. Hey, Joe Sullivan, can you take a stab at that answer, please?
Yeah, let's not confuse rainbow trout with steelhead trout. Steelhead trout are rainbow trout species that go out to the ocean to get bigger and then come upstream to spawn and reproduce. those currently do not exist in Wildcat Creek at the moment, but it doesn't mean we don't have resident rainbow trout in Wildcat Creek. We do. So the ones below Jewel Lake are using that habitat below Jewel Lake. The ones between Jewel Lake and Lake Anza are utilizing that habitat. And then there's a population upstream of Lake Anza. So they're all very disconnected. None of them are trying to get upstream past the reservoir at the moment. They're just utilizing the habitat that's available to them now.
Thanks so much, Joe. Great. Amanda, another question?
Yeah. Adele Ho asked, can someone talk a bit about the impacts of sediment transported downstream? I believe that sediment from the undeveloped upstream watershed has been a problem at the downstream Wildcat Creek sediment basin. And what is the value downstream of having the lake as a sediment trap?
So we talked about some of the, if you can view this, if you view sediment as really like the currency or riches of the watershed, you can imagine spreading that around as a great ecological service. It seems like if there's, is the question that if there's not a sediment, what benefit does Jewel Lake offer as a sediment trap? And then if it weren't there, what would be the concerns downstream? Does that sound about right, Amanda? Okay, great. And anyway, Scott, can I turn that one over to you?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things, so Jewel Lake, I mean, does trap the sediment as we've seen, but one of the things that happens, and what Mike explained earlier, is that the clean water leaving Jewel Lake is, you know, we talk about it in human terms that it's actively looking to pick up sediment. But it has the capacity to transport sediment, and it's more erosive downstream of the dam. And so what we would see in the short term is that you know, that some of those areas where sediment had been eroded may, you know, fill those pockets back in. There may be some a great aggradation, means that the creek bed may raise as some of that sediment is deposited downstream. But ultimately, you know, it'll achieve a state of dynamic equilibrium whereby, you know, that sediment all ultimately ends up in the bay. And one of the things that people, it is not very well publicized, but sediment in the bay is actually, you know, again, part of these natural processes, and you know, the sand that you see on the beaches, the mud that's in the mud flats in tidal wetlands, all that sediment has to come from somewhere. And San Francisco Bay is actually considered to be sediment starved, meaning that because of all the dams in Northern California of the rivers that flow into the bay, you know, you can imagine all the millions of tons of sediment that's trapped up in those watersheds behind those dams, that the bay actually is, you know, it could use more fine sediment. And so the sediment coming through the system would help to replenish, you know, the bay ecosystem. But at the same time, you know, the cities of Richmond and San Pablo have grown up around, you know, Wildcat Creek. And so there's also, you know, sediment management issues, even currently today within those cities where they need to be looking out for deposition and accumulation of sediment within the lower reaches of Wildcat Creek. The one thing I would just want to mention that, you know, we are a few minutes over time, and it seems like, you know, a lot of the folks are still with us through all this, which I appreciate. And one of the things that we had planned for the end of the meeting, and I think that what we'll do is put up a poll, which is really a way for us to get more kind of in-depth feedback from folks. And so if you want to stick around and fill out that poll in Zoom, you can. But over this week, we'll actually also post it to our website. And I think we have the ability to email the list of folks here when that happens, but I do invite you to check back on our project website to find that poll, because that feedback would be really valuable to us.
Are we able to post that one, Amanda?
The poll, yes, I can go ahead and put that up now. Actually,
are there-
I think Scott would need to do that. Scott, if you can go down onto the bottom and hit polls, and there should be hopefully 2 polls to choose from.
It will take me a moment, but I will do it.
Okay. And in the meantime, I wanted to mention that Peter Guerrero had asked about the 4 different alternatives on the Jewel Lake webpage, and where they would be able to find them. And those will be posted, the PowerPoint will be posted later. So check back later this week. And we're also hoping to have the video up at some point soon too. And it looks like the poll is up. So if you are on, you can go ahead and answer these questions.
And while we're going through that, folks, I want to thank everybody for participating tonight. It's a very exciting project. It's a very emotional project. It's really exciting to be part of a project where the deep connection that people have with the place is really into the planning process. And the more input we get for this, the more that process is improved. So we really appreciate you folks being here tonight. And for any further comments you might offer, you can spread the word around about the project so folks can find out some more about it. We certainly would like to have as much input as possible. And I'd like to thank not only everybody who showed up tonight, but folks who weren't able to make it or had to drop off a little earlier on for other reasons. And thank you, Director Eckles, for introducing this and for leading us into this project, and Director Coffey for coming in, and especially for the district team for all coming together to answer the questions tonight. And please know that we are available to answer your questions. So please use the links on the project webpage at ebparks.org. Thanks. I see some folks are answering some of the questions. This is great. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who submitted questions tonight. If we didn't get to your question and I happen to have missed it, or if we missed your statement that you sent over, when we send out the Survey Monkey, the questions on that will be the same as the first and second poll, but combined. But at the end of it, there's a chance to input any other comments, questions that you might have. So you can always put that, any of those on there, and we will get back to you with that. So just wanted to let you know that there are additional chances to get follow-up.
Appreciate you hanging on here to go over these questions. Looks like first question, is it important the Jewel Lake project maintains or increases the number of trails? See those results. And the second question, is it important the Jewel Lake project maintains or provides a destination for walks? And that destination, we know that means it has different definitions for different folks. 3, is it important the Jewel Lake project enhances habitat for native species like turtles, migratory birds, fish, and such? And then number 4, is it important the project provides fish and salmonid passage? Number 5, is it important the Jewel Lake project allows the lake to transition to a meadow? 6, is it important that the Jewel Lake project provides an open water lake area? And number 7, is it important the Jewel Lake project focuses on historic Wildcat Creek? Number 8, is it important that the Jewel Lake project prevents sediment from filling the lake? So after all you've heard tonight, the great questions that were offered up by all the participants tonight and the information presented, this is a little bit more of an opportunity to directly state your preference on some of the management goals and the concepts themselves of the project. And here we are. We are
I went ahead and shared it because everybody that it was showing had participated.
Oh, that's
So-
great. Well, thanks for all the participation, folks. Looks like maintainer increases the number of trails. Well, strongly agree and agree, knowing that we had so many hikers in the initial poll and what a great destination this is. It shouldn't come as a big surprise. We appreciate that. Destination, absolutely. It looks like Jewel Lake, the Tilla Nature Area in general, it's a wonderful spot, has been for generations, actually eons. And we certainly appreciate that folks see that it provides a destination, although a number of folks are undecided and disagree with that, which is really interesting for us to know about. If you have any specifics about why you disagree, you can send in those comments. That's super helpful. Enhancing habitat for native species, 76% of the respondents agreed. We didn't have anybody disagreeing on that one. It's great direction. And also as far as fish and salmon passage, a lot of strongly agree there as well. So that seems to be a big priority for our guests. And transitioning to meadow doesn't seem to be as big a draw. Open water area, we have folks who are disagreeing and undecided and strongly agreeing and agreeing. So it looks like it's pretty close to an even split among those who are on the agree side of the scale and the disagree side of the scale. Thanks. And historic Wildcat Creek restoration. It looks like folks are in favor of that. And although those folks who are undecided, again, please write any questions you have about what might offer some more clarity. We'd really appreciate it. And sedimentation is one of the big concerns here, the currency of the watershed. And is it important that the lake prevent sedimentation, the lake project prevents sedimentation from filling the lake? And a lot of folks, that should be the case. Thank you, everybody. And I'd like to turn it over to Director Eckles for a closing word or two. Thank you, Director Eckles. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, I just really wanted to say thanks to everybody for being here and for providing your input and really excellent questions. I learned a lot this evening and appreciate you taking the time and your engagement, and appreciate all the comments we've received so far, and also look forward to hearing more from you as the process continues. And really want to thank Mike and the whole team for the presentation tonight and for all of their work on this project. So thank you all. And have a great night.
Thanks, Director Eckles. Want to thank everybody again for participating. Thanks for all who are here, still remaining with us, all 32 of you. Have a great rest of your evening, and look forward to following up with you on any comments or questions you might have. Thanks so much, everybody.